Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe, but today we're talking about $500 billion or up to it for artificial intelligence, but without ethics. Now, hear me out. I just please hear me out. And if you're a longtime listener, longtime follower, etc., you know I don't have to say this, but for you new people out here that are watching this, this is not going to be political. I do not care what your politics are. I don't care who you voted for, who you love or hate, whatever. We are going to stick with the facts. My opinions are going to be clearly labeled when I give them, which will be mostly at the end. And for the record, I'm all for advancing infrastructure regardless of the type. We need better roads. We need to advance AI. So I actually applaud this. I actually applaud the move that we are going to expand our artificial intelligence infrastructure. However, there is a problem that governments, especially democracy-based governments, have, and that is keeping up with regulations on technological advancement. Now, we've seen this through history and multiple countries on what happens when these things get out of balance. Look at the Industrial Revolution. This was a massive step forward for humanity, but it also brought a lot of unforeseen circumstances to the world that we learned and therefore addressed after the fact. It basically blew up pollution. This led to new illnesses, cancers, and all of that. Everybody was burning coal. Look at Newcastle, England, etc., etc. We saw high rates of illness, high rates of lung issues, and all of that, which we then realized, okay, this is as a result of it and had to address. We also had unsafe conditions that led to worker injuries and deaths. We've had mine collapses, etc., etc. And so by virtue of that, we retroactively come in and say, now there are worker safety standards. We have to improve the conditions in the mine. Maybe it's breathing apparatuses, maybe it's better structures, whatever that is. We've obviously had a whole issue of child labor. Instead of putting the kids in school, we're putting them to work, etc., etc. So we address that, and now the kids get an education before they essentially get into the workforce, or at least fully into the workforce, and on and on and on. Humanity eventually catches up. And we eventually start fixing those issues. And in the last 20-ish years, we've started to basically learn the harms of social media, obviously based on tech. It's addictive, it's essentially depressive, it's harming the kids. And only now, after so much damage, are we really starting to look at the data, let alone fix this. Right? We're now just seeing it. You can go read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It's probably one of the latest works on this. It's fantastic. I just went through it myself to really understand longitudinally what we've done. We're always behind. And so now it's artificial intelligence. And I love the capabilities. Again, if you're a longtime listener, longtime follower, you listen to my radio show, whatever, you know that. It's going to help us in so many different ways. But with that good, like an industrial revolution, which is kind of what this is in its own right, we also have to take the bad. We have people already addicted to technology thanks to social media. Now they're getting addicted to chatbots. We have seen basically the isolation continue that we've seen, especially in young boys, basically go from chat rooms, if you will, to chatbots itself, where people have AI girlfriends and boyfriends, etc., etc. We also have basically seen demonstrably false information or disinformation delivered authoritatively by a large language model. Now, it's not pure disinformation in the sense of disinformation that's been created, although AI has made that 1,000 times easier. But studies have shown that we see a large language model like a ChatGPT, when it gives an answer, to be authoritative because it is coming from a technological, quote unquote, researched position from an AI, even when it's lying to us. And by virtue of that, that's a problem. On top of it, AI is starting to be used in battlefields like Ukraine, integrated into drones and more, which means we are now improving warfighting capability there, which is lethal because essentially the drones don't have the humanity that we have. We're not looking to see, is it a school bus or a tank? And if we can't put eyeballs on it and it mistakes the school bus for a tank, we have a very serious problem. And so with this backdrop comes a massive investment in AI, and so it has to come with ethical considerations, but sadly that doesn't seem to be the case here, and I'm going to let you decide, because here are the facts on the ground. Now for that, this is what is prompting this. You might have already heard of it, but this is what happened. President Trump on yesterday, essentially was talking about a joint venture and investing up to $500 billion for infrastructure tied to artificial intelligence by a new partnership that was formed by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank out of Japan. Now, this new entity known as Stargate. And I don't know why governments have to name stuff after TV shows I like. But anyway, this new entity, Stargate, will start building out data centers and electricity generation needed for further advancement of essentially a fast evolving artificial intelligence based in Texas, which is where they're going to do this, according to the White House. Now, this initial investment is expected to reach $100 billion. It could reach 5 times that sum, up to $500 billion for that, according to President Trump. And so joining the president on the stage was Mayoshi Son of SoftBank, Sam Altman of OpenAI, and Larry Ellison of Oracle fame. Now, all three credited Trump for helping making basically this project possible, even though building has basically already started for this, and the project actually goes back to 2024, if you didn't know. The initial plans for Stargate go back to the Biden administration. Now, tech outlets, specifically the publication of the information, first started reporting on this in March of 2024, but obviously now it's coming to fruition under the Trump administration. Now, OpenAI has long relied on Microsoft data centers essentially for its artificial intelligence, and obviously Oracle and SoftBank are looking at OpenAI to lead the charge in the actual AI development, maker of ChatGPT. They've always been on the forefront of this, but they have now, basically OpenAI has signaled interest in building their own data centers to essentially be independent on the reliability of another corporation like a Microsoft, etc. So for the record, I'm actually a huge fan of this. Strengthening our infrastructure is indeed important for national security, for being on the forefront, for being competitive. This is a big win, and I'm glad that President Biden started this and President Trump is pushing this through. That's great. But as I also said, we need to make sure that we are expanding and developing artificial intelligence ethically. And the interesting part of the equation here is that we are indeed starting to wrap ethics, or rather we were starting to wrap ethics around AI. Now, here's how this started. An executive order, basically known as 14110, which was dated October 30th, 2023. Therefore, President Biden executed it. And the title of this executive order was Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence. Now, the nuts and bolts of this policy included these direct quotes, and I quote the executive order. Artificial intelligence must be safe and secure. Meeting this goal requires robust, reliable, repeatable, and standardized evaluations of AI systems, as well as policies, institutions, and, as appropriate, other mechanisms to test, understand, and mitigate risks from these systems before they are put into use. That all seems very reasonable, especially when AI can be used in so many different things and for so many different ways, positive and negative. I continue the executive order. It also requires addressing AI systems' most pressing security risks, including with respect to biotechnology, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and other national security dangers, while navigating AI's opacity and complexity, end quote. And yes, absolutely, we should have a good vetting process for biotechnology, lest it invent, the next COVID that's 99 billion times more lethal, or in cybersecurity, where it can be used for things like generation of malware, or even detection of 0 days, as we've seen now, thanks to Google, not to mention critical infrastructure and so much more. I continue the executive order. Testing and evaluations, including post-deployment performance monitoring, will help ensure that AI systems function as intended, are resilient against misuse or dangerous modifications, are ethically developed and operated in a secure manner, and are compliant with applicable federal laws and policies, end quote. Yeah. Sure, that makes a lot of sense. We don't want somebody building the Terminators and then sticking them on the army or whatever that is. Ethics should be involved in what we do. We are overarchingly and historically an ethical people. I continue the executive order. Finally, my administration will help develop effective labeling and content provenance mechanisms so that Americans are able to determine when content is generated using AI and when it is not. These actions will provide a vital foundation for our approach that address AI's risks without unduly reducing its benefits, end quote. And yeah, I also agree with that as well. How much AI generated content have we seen? And don't even think about it from a misinformation, disinformation standpoint that I've talked about extensively on this. Think about it from the standpoint of essentially the kids that are coming up in this. We have a huge problem in social media, specifically like the Instagrams of the world, where we have teenage girls that are looking at these AI fake generated, formerly photoshopped, quote unquote, generated issues, and they're getting depressed because they're never going to be that, because humans can't be. I mean, look at Kim Kardashian. Everything she does is airbrush, Photoshop, whatever the hell you want to call it. And it's so easy to do that with artificial intelligence, just creating the perfect, quote unquote, human beings, which is further, causing this mental health crisis among youth. Not to mention just the ethics of having, this there. So if the kid can see, oh, this is clearly AI generated, or content that looks legit, let's say it's a negative video against President Trump or Biden or whoever, it's AI generated, and we're able to quickly understand that due to watermarking. I think that's a good thing. Now, the executive order goes on to talk about the need for, and I quote, promoting responsible innovation, competition, and collaboration will allow the United States to lead in AI and unlock the technology's potential to solve some of society's most difficult challenges. That's obviously a very important thing. I completely agree with that, as well as the need for training, development, etc. That was all mentioned in the executive article, not to mention protecting intellectual property that are being used by these systems. Sam Altman, I think, and I've mentioned this in past segments, is trying to change intellectual property laws to give AI a pass, and this essentially strengthened it. This executive order under President Biden strengthened this to essentially say, yeah, we should be respecting the George R.R. Martins when they write Game of Thrones, or the Sarah Silvermans when they write books, and they should not be used without some kind of acknowledgement, compensation, whatever that looks like. Essentially, what we're talking about here is helping innovation in all across the board. This executive order also mentions things like smaller businesses or smaller outfits for independent startups that may be able to innovate in a way that a larger behemoth can. If the only software platform we had out there was Microsoft, we would basically be in an ecosystem where competition was completely crushed, and we'd all have to use Word when there might be better things out there for us to do, right? Or Excel, that kind of stuff. So I'm a fan of this. I think this is reasonable, and I think this would be a good thing to have around artificial intelligence. But this executive order is no more. Now, on January 20th, the day that President Trump was inaugurated and sworn into office, he signed an executive order entitled Initial Rescissions of Harmful Executive Orders. Now, this essentially killed a slew of Biden's executive orders through his entire term. It reinstated some of President Trump's first term executive orders that Biden had killed, because that's how we roll. But I'm not going to debate the merits of this. I'm not going to talk about any of the other executive orders. You can love it, hate it, whatever it is that he removed from Biden. I don't care. I'm sticking to this topic. And the topic at hand and the facts at hand is quite simply this. Trump's new executive order killed basically 14110 that wrapped essentially formal AI ethics structure and guidelines around the development and regulation of artificial intelligence. And so with that, I want to talk about my opinion here, because I think this is an unbelievably important one. I am not a fan of killing AI regulation for everything just stated, but let's think this through. For the record, okay? This could mean that AI can be unrestrained when it's being trained on things like warfighting capability. If we don't have ethics there, we can make it completely lethal. We can make it completely unethical if we don't have any kind of guidelines that essentially allow this. In other words, it doesn't matter if it's a school bus, because it doesn't care if it's a school bus or a tank. It's not trying to discern either one, and therefore here we are. On top of it, we can now have it create malware, because again, here we are. That malware, for example, could be used against a population like ours. It could enhance surveillance capabilities that could be used against us or other foreign populations around the world. On top of it, think about intellectual property. That's back on the table for being ingested or training. Part of an ethical framework is to ensure that intellectual property, and this will be adjudicated in the courts. I know that basically Sam Altman and OpenAI were in essentially Parliament in the United Kingdom back in 2024 talking about this. I did an entire video. I literally quoted where they were going with this, which I think is their stance for the world about changing intellectual property laws. But right now, without any kind of ethical guidance, that's back on the table, which means the George R.R. Martins and Sarah Silvermans will continue to be ingested without any kind of recourse for them. On top of it, we can talk about the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and the Facebooks of the world. They can train them to be more addictive, similar to how games like apps on our phones have been integrating psychological measures to basically keep us addicted and keep us going. The Anxious Generation has a really good chapter on specifically that, and I urge everybody to read that, again, by Jonathan Haidt. Now, on top of it, we can also see better disinformation. That is one of the big issues. As artificial intelligence become more natural, quicker to respond, more intuitive, to speak like an American, speak like a Frenchman, whatever, etc., disinformation could ramp up. Now, here's the thing. We have a new incoming Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. It's a cabinet position, as all the cabinets are being replaced. However, I watched the confirmation hearing of former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who has been tapped for this, and she said in her hearing that disinformation should no longer be a focus at all for either the Department of Homeland Security or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, and just focus on, let's say, the actual malware type threats that we have. And I can understand that mission. But if we're not looking at disinformation, which is pervasive, that's a very serious problem. And that's not a right or a left thing. That's a society thing. And so I truly hope I'm wrong. Like, I hope that this is going to get ethical, here. Obviously, this is not political. Again, I don't care if you love or hate the current president or the former president or all of this. I just think that as we are looking at artificial intelligence, developing artificial intelligence, we have to have some guidelines. We have to have some ethics. And I understand the slippery slope argument that basically says, well, China's not going to have those ethics, or Russia's not going to have those ethics, et cetera, et cetera. But I also like to think that we have a history of rising above essentially looking at unethical positions that could potentially harm our populations to protect citizens, to protect the world, while basically maintaining competitiveness. I think there can be a balance there, and I think we should be trying to achieve that. And so I'd be making, for the record, this exact same video if we were in an alternate timeline and it was a President Harris that did the same thing. This is not political. I just think this is a big issue. And so we just have to stick to the truth. And that's exactly what's going on. And that's exactly the nuts and bolts of it. We are going to have a massive explosion in infrastructure creation for artificial intelligence, and we've reduced the ethics standards around it. And I think that's not a good combination. So we can have that debate. Happy to do it. Just please don't get political on me. I'd love to stick just to this topic, but I know that's not the world we're living in today. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please, please, please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.